Three, two, one. Hey, y'all. Hey, welcome back to part two of chapter 12 of my Becoming Supernatural readings by Dr. Joe Dispenza. In this chapter, we're tapping into the science and the sacred nature of the body's intuitive technology, specifically the pineal gland. In this section, Dr. Joe explains how the pineal gland can be activated through the breath, focus, and meditation. He walks us through the anatomy, like how the gland has tiny crystals and a piezoelectric property that allows it to act like a radio antenna. When you breathe a certain way, squeeze the right muscles, and elevate your energy, you begin to compress and activate this gland. So it's pretty dormant until you work for it. And those who know this work know that that breath that Dr. Joe gets you to practice is pretty intense. And I mean intense. This activation sends a signal that tunes you to higher frequencies. This is where you stop reacting to life from your past conditionings and instead start tuning into the quantum. So let's get into it. Activating the pineal gland. For years, I spent an enormous amount of time studying the pineal gland and seeking researchers who did extensive measurements of this metabolites and tissues. My interest was in tying together my findings with some ancient mysteries. One abstract in particular piqued my interest. The pineal gland is a neuroendocrine transducer secreting melatonin responsible for physiological circadian rhythm control. A new form of biomineralization has been studied in the human pineal gland and consists of small crystals that are less than 20 microns in length. These crystals are responsible for electromechanical biological transduction mechanism in the pineal gland due to the structure and the piezoelectric properties. That's a lot of words to digest. It was a lot to say. But let's break it down into two meaningful points. The key words here in reverse order are piezoelectric properties and transducer. The piezoelectric effect occurs when you apply pressure to certain materials and that mechanical stress is changed into an electrical charge. To put it in simple terms, the pineal gland contains calcite crystals made of calcium, carbon, and oxygen, and because of their structure, they express this effect. Like an antenna, the pineal gland has the capacity to become electrically activated and generate electromagnetic fields that can tune to information. Listen, this is why we say we are electromagnetic beings, because the thing that is in the middle of our skull is called the pineal gland, and it has electromagnetic capabilities like an antenna, and it's measurable. Yeah. So, like an antenna, the pineal gland has the capacity to become electrically activated and generate electromagnetic fields that can tune in to information. That's point number one. In addition, in the same way an antenna pulsates a rhythm or frequency to match the frequency of an incoming signal, the pineal gland receives information carried on invisible electromagnetic fields. Since all frequency carries information, once the antenna connects to the exact signal of the electromagnetic field, there must be a way to convert and descramble that signal into a meaningful message. That's exactly what a transducer does. And that's the second point. A transducer is anything that receives a signal in the form of one type of energy and converts it into a signal in another form. Take a moment to look around you. The space that you are sitting in is filled with TV, radio, and Wi-Fi waves that are all different frequency ranges of invisible electromagnetic energy. We cannot see Wi-Fi. We cannot see the signals that our antenna in our television gets, but they are signals, electromagnetic signals. We can't see the cell phone tower signals that our phones are operating on, but they exist. So this is the same concept that you need to understand as it relates to our bodies. It says, for example, the antenna that picks up a range of frequencies carrying a signal to your TV is transduced into a picture on your TV screen. When you tune to the FM station, you're tuning your antenna to a specific electromagnetic frequency. He says the information carried in that frequency range is then transduced into a coherent signal, which is the music you hear with your ears. So you can't see any of them with your eyes, but they're still there. The study I quoted says the pineal gland is a neuroendocrine transducer capable of receiving and converting signals within the brain. When the pineal gland acts as a transducer, it can pick up frequencies above our three-dimensional space-time, sensory-based reality. Once the pineal gland is activated, it can tune in to higher dimensions of this space-time, which we learned in a previous chapter is the realm of time-space. And like a TV, it can then turn the information carried on those frequencies into vivid imagery and surreal, lucid, transcendental experiences in our mind, including profoundly heightened multisensory visions beyond our vocabulary. This is a bit like experiencing a multidimensional IMAX movie. At this point, you may be wondering, since this little gland exists inside my skull, how am I going to exert mechanical stress on the crystals in it to create a piezoelectric effect and activate the pineal gland so it becomes like an antenna? How are we going to do that? And how will that antenna pick up frequencies and information beyond matter and light so that it can transduce those electromagnetic signatures into meaningful imagery, like a transcendental experience beyond this three-dimensional reality? For the pineal gland to become activated, four important things must happen. I will address three of them now, and then I will give you the fourth step when it's time to learn the meditation, which is at the end of chapter 12, part 5. The piezoelectric effect. Critical to creating the piezoelectric effect in the pineal gland are the calcite crystals mentioned above and shown in figure 12.4. Remember, these are very tiny crystals, approximately 1 to 20 microns in length. To put this in context, their size can range anywhere from 100 to a quarter with the width of a human hair. For the most part, they are octahedron, hexahedron, and rhombohedron in shape. As we already learned in chapter 5, the purpose of the breathing technique we do before many meditations is to pull the mind out of the body by liberating potential energy stored as emotions in the lower three energy centers. As we inhale and contract those intrinsic muscles, follow our breath from the perineum all the way up our spine to the top of our head, and then hold our breath and squeeze those muscles more. We're increasing intrathecal pressure. As I mentioned earlier in the book, this is the internal pressure created when you push up against your insides. For example, when you hold your breath and lift something heavy. The word piezoelectric is derived from the Greek words piezein, which means to squeeze or press, and piezo, which means to push. So it's no coincidence that I ask you to hold your breath and squeeze those intrinsic muscles. When you do this, you are pushing cerebral spinal fluid up against the pineal gland, exerting mechanical stress on it. This mechanical stress translates into an electrical charge, and its exact action that compresses the stacked crystals in the pineal gland and creates a piezoelectric effect. The crystals of the pineal gland generate an electrical charge in response to the stress that you are applying. One of the unique characteristics of the piezoelectric effect is that it's reversible, meaning that materials exhibiting the direct piezoelectric effect, the crystals, also exhibit a converse piezoelectric effect. Once the crystals in the gland are compressed and are creating an electrical charge, the electromagnetic field that is emanating from the pineal gland causes the crystals in it to stretch as the field increases. When the crystals generating the electromagnetic field reach their limit and can stretch no further, they contract, and the electromagnetic field reverses direction, moves inward toward the pineal gland. When the electromagnetic field reaches the pineal gland crystals, it compresses them again, producing yet another electromagnetic field. This cycle of expanding and reversing the field perpetuates a pulsating electromagnetic field. It's no wonder then that I ask you to hold your breath, squeeze, and contract those muscles. And it's no surprise that I insist you repeat this process over and over. As you keep doing the breath and holding and squeezing again and again, With every cycle of breathing, you are activating the piezoelectric properties of the pineal gland. So for those of us who were asking, why does he keep doing this dang breath in the beginning of the meditation, some of the meditations, this is exactly why. Because as you continue to do the process, now you're creating a pulsating electromagnetic field. And I'm going to keep going even though my light went out. But you're creating a pulsating effect, which is making your electromagnetic field even stronger magnetically, right? So he says the more you do this, the more you speed up the cycles per second of the expansion and contraction of this electromagnetic field, making the pulses get faster and faster. And now the pineal gland becomes a pulsating antenna capable of picking up subtler, that's a word, faster electromagnetic frequencies. We'll take a look at figure 12.5 closely. We talked about the movement of cerebral spinal fluid during the breath in chapter 5, but let's build on the teaching. As the fluid enters the brain, it moves up through the central canal, through the space between the spinal column and the spinal cord. From this juncture, it flows in two directions. First, the fluid moves into the fourth ventricle, followed by the third ventricle. As the fluid travels from the fourth to the third ventricle, it passes through a narrow path or channel, and nestled right at the back of the third ventricle rests what looks like a tiny pine cone. That's what pineal means. This is the pineal gland, and it's about the size of a large grain of rice. Second, the cerebral spinal fluid also flows around the back of the cerebellum to the other side of the pineal gland, surrounding the entire gland with pressurized fluid. By increasing the intrathecal pressure, you funnel a greater volume of fluid into the chamber of the third ventricle, as well as from the space around the cerebellum. So when you hold your breath and squeeze, this extra volume of fluid exerts pressure from both directions up against the crystals, causing them to compress and create a piezoelectric effect. This is the first event that must take place to activate the pineal gland. Part two, or number two, the pineal gland releases its metabolites. Cerebral spinal fluid moves through a closed system called the ventricular system. The ventricular system facilitates the movement of this fluid from the base of the spine up through the spinal column, through the four chambers of the brain called the aqueducts or ventricles, and back down the sacrum, the base of the spine. When you inhale and follow your breath to the top of your head and then hold your breath and squeeze up and in, you are accelerating the cerebral spinal fluid. On the surface of the pineal gland are tiny hairs called cilia, Latin for eyelashes. The action of the accelerated fluid moving faster than normal through the chambers of the ventricular system tickles the tiny hairs, which overstimulates the pineal gland. Because the pineal gland is shaped like a phallus, the stimulation produced by the acceleration of the fluid moving past it, combined with the electrical activation created by an increase in intrathecal pressure in a closed system, causes the gland to ejaculate some profound upgraded metabolites of melatonin into the brain. You're now one step closer to activating the pineal gland and having a transcendental experience. And then third, I think it's, yeah, 3 steps. Third, energy is delivered directly to the brain. So much like sending a rocket ship into space, overcoming gravity to get it off the ground is the part that requires the most energy. So to move that energy from our lower centers demands a great deal of intensity and effort. And this is why people report almost passing out when they do this breath, especially at the workshops for advanced meditators. When you're first starting out, you're probably a little fearful to let it go that far. But I've heard many advanced meditators say that passing out is totally normal. I've never done it. But anyways, he says, the breath becomes our passionate intention to free ourselves from the self-limiting emotions of our past. The spinal column becomes the delivery mechanism for this energy, and the top of the head becomes the target. And as you know by now, every time you perform the breath, you send charged particles up the spinal column. As these particles increase in velocity and acceleration, they create what's known as an inductance field. This inductance field reverses the flow of two-way information that typically facilitates communication from the brain to the body and to the body and from the body to the brain, much like a vacuum. The inductance field draws that energy from those lower centers energy involved with orgasms, consumption, digestion, fight or flight, stress, and control, and delivers it directly to the brainstem in a spiraling motion. So it goes up the brain in a spiraling motion. As the energy travels up through each vertebrae, it passes the nerves that run from the spinal cord to different parts of the body, and some of that energy is then transferred through the peripheral nerves that affect the tissue and organs of the body. The current that runs along these nerve channels activates the body's meridian system, resulting in the other systems of the body getting more energy. So I don't know if you guys know anything about metaphysics, but Louise Hay was a good teacher of metaphysics, and she taught a lot about how there are different thought meridians in the body, like how different thoughts are connected to different organs of the body. Well, this takes it at a different angle, but he says that the different bodies' meridian systems are basically they're getting charged up every time you do this pineal gland activation because more energy is now surging through your entire system. Once the energy reaches the brainstem, it must pass through the reticular formation. It's the job of the reticular formation to constantly edit information going from the brain to the body, as well as from the body to the brain. This information is part of a system called the reticular activating system. Sound familiar? Which is responsible for levels of wakefulness. For instance, when you wake up from a deep sleep because you hear a sound in your house, it's the RAS, or the reticular activating system, that alerts you and arouses you. That's its rudimentary function. However, as the sympathetic nervous system is activated and merges with the parasympathetic nervous system, instead of depleting the body's stored energy, it releases that energy back to the brain. Once this energy reaches the brainstem, the thalamic gate opens like a door and energy moves through the reticular formation to the thalamus, where it relays information to the neocortex. Now, the reticular formation is open and you experience greater levels of awareness. In a sense, you become more conscious and awakened. Think of the thalamus as a big train station with tracks leading to higher centers of the brain. That's how the brain goes into gamma brainwave patterns. As a side note, there are two individual thalami in the midbrain, one on each side, which feed each hemisphere in the neocortex. The pineal gland sits right between them, facing the back of the brain. See figure 12.8. When the energy reaches the thalamic junction, remember the thalamus is like a relay station to all other parts of the brain. This thalami send a message directly to the pineal gland to secrete its metabolites into the brain. The effect is that the thinking neocortex becomes aroused and goes into a higher brainwave pattern like gamma. The nature of those chemical derivatives of melatonin relaxes the body and at the same time awakens the mind. If you remember, when you're in beta brainwaves, your sympathetic nervous system is aroused for an emergency in your outer world and utilizes energy to survive. The difference with gamma brainwaves is that instead of losing vital energy, you're liberating and creating more energy in your body. You're not in any emergency or survival state when this occurs. You're in pure bliss, and your sympathetic nervous system is switching on to arouse you to pay more attention to whatever is happening within your mind. In chapter 5, I said when that energy moves from the body to the brain, a torus field is created around the body. So your electromagnetic field becomes like, like an apple, how it's round and everything goes to the center of the top and then out of the bottom, like that. That's what he compares it to. He says, as you run a current up your spinal column by accelerating the movement of the cerebral spinal fluid, your body becomes like a magnet and you create an electromagnetic field around it. A torus field represents a dynamic flow of energy. At the same time, the torus field is moving up, out, and around your body. When the pineal gland becomes activated, a reverse torus field of electromagnetic energy is drawing energy into the body through the top of your head. Since all frequency carries information, now your pineal gland is receiving information from beyond the visible light field and from beyond your senses. When these three happenings occur in tandem, it's going to feel like you're having an orgasm in your head. You've now created an antenna in your brain, and the antenna is picking up information from realms beyond matter and beyond space and time. Information is no longer coming from your senses or your eyes. interaction with your environment. Instead, you're getting information from the quantum field moving to another eye, your third eye, from the pineal gland in the back of your brain. And that is the end of part 2 for chapter 12. If you've ever heard the phrase decalcify your third eye, this is the science behind what people are intuitively referring to. And yes, it is possible. You are more powerful than you have been led to believe. To keep following this journey, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like the videos, comment on the videos, and be sure to head to the playlist linked in my bio. I'll also be going live to break this down more personal with my personal insights. So don't miss it. And that's going to be on Tuesday night. But until then, we're going into part 3 when melatonin gets an upgrade, magic happens. So I'll see you in the next video.